funny that you mentioned there's no more Assassins and Templars, because that's basically for me was the core. That was that struggle, that...
Like you worked on 1, 2, Brotherhood.
Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And then I was gone.
Yeah.
For multiple reasons. Ubisoft and some of the producer realized that, oh, now we have a license. Yeah. This is how now they can do multiple Assassin's Creed a year. Is because they have this DNA stuff. If you play the new ones, they try to make it better and better. I've read that, because I haven't played them, that maybe eventually they will have to rethink their system. But for me, it's really a personal thing. Yeah, I know it became big, but it's really a personal work for me.
Yeah.
What you're looking at here is a compilation of clips from the original creative director of Assassin's Creed, Patrice Désilets. And what's interesting is the comments he makes on the games he worked on compared to the games he didn't.
I haven't played any Assassin's Creed game since I played the third one for 2 hours, and then I realized I had no fun playing them. It wasn't because of the quality of it, it's just because it was my baby, and suddenly I couldn't do anything, so it was like, I'm working, I'm not having fun.
He's salty. But who wouldn't be? A very mysterious leaf in the production of Brotherhood shows something went very wrong between him and the big wigs at Ubisoft. That, along with Patrice working on a new game with THQ, Ubisoft getting the rights to that game because they bought out THQ, a sudden layoff for Patrice, and then Patrice immediately suing Ubisoft, resulting in a 6-year lawsuit for his game back. Yeah, he was salty. But salty really is just another word for frustration. Frustration about a timeline of games he was never able to finish his own way. Or better yet, halt the production of his game so it doesn't become a multi-million series forever and ever. If you've heard anything from the Assassin's Creed community for the past, 10 years, it's that the Assassin's Creed franchise has lost the spirit of Assassin's Creed altogether, with each edition resembling the original games less and less, becoming much more of a conventional RPG game than Assassins and Templars. This, of course, has caused the fanbase to have some mixed opinions. Some enjoy the games for what they are, and some hark on and on about a longing for the time long ago when characters had hoodies and hidden blades. This has caused a lot of back and forth, critiquing every aspect of the franchise. But there's one phrase when a new game comes out that is yelled from the top of the mountain cliffs to the lowest of valleys. And that phrase is historical accuracy. The modern Assassin's Creed games are not historically accurate. I was never really a fan of what kind of conversation this statement would eventually spawn. But recently, I've been feeling worse than I usually do when I see these clips on Twitter, YouTube, and just talking to friends in general. So much so that when Assassin's Creed Shadows was close to release, and I was hearing clips like this.
I'm no historical expert here, but I'm pretty sure that a gentleman like this would be a bit out of place in 16th century Japan.
I realized it was getting out of hand, and people needed better discourse. But not in some ironclad defense for Assassin's Creed against pure gaming historians, no. But more so, a curious look into the underbelly of one of the cornerstone franchises I loved as a kid. Were the old games actually historically accurate? I mean, a lot of fans say they are, but honestly, I actually don't know myself. How accurate are they? How much does it matter to make a game historically accurate? What kind of factors do you have to think of? Are the fans actually right for once that the modern AC games not being historically accurate has ruined the franchise? Or are gamers full of horseshit?
And that was because Assassin's Creed is a Trojan horse.
Okay.
People think it's about a guy running around killing people. It's not. That's the beginning. I took you as, I want to be that guy, and then eventually, that is why it became something I feel bigger.
I really don't know why, but this clip got me spiraling and rewriting this script almost 3 different times. He called Assassin's Creed a Trojan horse. That's interesting. The way he talks about the origins and the essence of this game is interesting, and that probably includes what he has to say about the historical elements too. So rather than some kind of GQ video where I point out that this is not accurate and this scene is true and not true, I decided I kind of wanted to format the video as a journey of me trying to satisfy my curiosity, because this was an itch I genuinely tried to ignore. For a while I didn't think I could structure this in the video. I had so many other easier topic ideas I could do, and the research I was doing made the script just keep going and going with no end goal in sight. But The itch never went away. It got stronger and stronger, distracting me from working on any kind of video except this. The itch was so strong, in fact, it got to the point I genuinely needed to know. Was Assassin's Creed ever historically accurate? Now, as I mentioned before, this isn't me fighting either side of the fence. It's a storyline of the stuff I've learned. But if it was, I will just gladly show gamers the intro to every single Assassin's Creed game so far, and that would be the end of the video. But that would be dumb. Even gamers know that a video game doesn't have to be 100% historically accurate. That would just be so boring, and it would waste the time and energy of anyone with a creative molecule. Guy, and if you're still here to argue, Patrice says the same thing.
This is not a historical game. It's a sci-fi universe in which you play in a historical setting, and that's important. Assassin's Creed, I said it before, it's a sci-fi story. You go through the Animus. The end of the world is not in medieval time. The end of the world is in the present time. You're trying to save the world of the present time, and then Altair's story is a different story.
You heard the big man. You're wrong, he's right. But low-key, at the same time, isn't that the case for most historical media? From video games set in the medieval times to TV shows set thousands of years back in the past, the premise of historical media makes it automatically not 100% accurate. There always has to be a little bit of exaggeration to tell a half-decent story. You know, they play it up. They add stuff in places we can't fully confirm because we weren't there. Pining for 100% accuracy in entertainment is a dead-end street. But what is a much better conversation to be having is whether Assassin's Creed is not accurate, but authentic.
Historical accuracy is more what we tend to term as historical authenticity. It's trying to get the feel of the time period across, making sure that the units look like they were historically accurate. The name and places feel accurate. That when you go through the game, you're not going to go, hang on, this is wrong for the era. It's all about trying to get that feeling across.
I really want to zone in on that last word. Feeling.
At its core, Insomniac Games' adventure strives to make you feel like Spider-Man.
Feeling and immersion are probably the most common words used amongst a dev team. It's also the most common word in everybody's script in a video essay. But the thing is, video games have a unique mountain to overcome that's different to any other form of media. The player has complete control in the game, meaning they don't have to follow the historically accurate sequence of events at all. And to be honest, that's probably where most of the fun happens in these open world games. Sure, Assassin's Creed puts certain rules in place on the player, like you can't kill civilians or you can't be caught in certain restricted areas, but for the most part, you can slaughter, manipulate, and control the world as you see fit. And you do so as you work through the canon events of the story mode the game wants you to follow. Accuracy isn't what you want here. Trust me, Gandhi never discovered nukes. But it's sure as hell funny to make him discover nukes in my playthrough of Civ 5. That's why I think the best conversation to have right now is if Assassin's Creed feels historical. Did it evoke that feeling of the era at the time? So while I might mention that something isn't historically accurate in the video, I don't bring it up to say that it's historically inaccurate and therefore is objectively wrong. I'm saying it's not accurate and it doesn't add to the overall authenticity of the world. I hope. This is definitely going to be my longest video, so if some stuff slipped through the cracks, forgive me. What clothes did the people in this era wear? What jobs did the average man do? What was the climate at the time? Did they have any major landmarks in the towns? What accents did they have? What weapons or abilities were they most famous for? These are all important questions to answer when creating an authentic experience. You know what's pretty low on the list of things to be asking? The thing is, people online pick and choose what they want to start raging about for being not historically accurate. We're completely fine with mythological gods being in our historical games, or a demigod taking on a whole army of people by just repeatedly pressing square. But I promise you, if I made a game where you control an army, and by the time you found another enemy army, 70% of your soldiers died of dysentery, disease, or just straight up killing themselves, Steam reviews wouldn't be too hot now, would they? I say this all to say that growing up, the Assassin's Creed games were nothing but immersive. Each setting of each game would bring on a completely different spirit of history as I ran through the streets of rooftops. Even at 12, I understood this fictional hooded ninja may not have been real, but using him as a vehicle to see some of the most beautiful, diverse open world maps at the time sure was real. The opening title reveal in Brotherhood as you and Ezio's uncle look out onto the city is so surreal. And when Ezio's theme begins to play as it pans out onto the city of Rome, it honestly makes me tear up about how much I freaking love this franchise. It feels amazing every time I revisit this scene. Feelings, however, are subjective. Growing up, I never pointed out the blaring issues with this game's history because I didn't know any better. When I play Assassin's Creed Syndicate, I can't tell if the outfits these characters are wearing are from the Victorian era or the Georgian era of London. I don't know. Seems British enough to me, mate. But now that I'm revisiting these games, I'm no longer relying on Ubisoft to ground their authenticity in actual reality. And throughout the entire franchise, I have uncovered some good, some bad, and some honestly pretty ugly interpretations of history. But how do you know if a historical change is good or bad? It's case by case, but you kind of have to figure out why they made the change and then figure out, was it worth it? Because like I said before, this is a game, and the main purpose of a game is to be entertaining. That should be your benchmark. Do you pull an Assassin's Creed 3 and make traversing through the frontier a walkable journey? Even though there's no man on earth that could walk from Boston to New York in like 20 minutes. Or do you make a one-to-one game where walking to cities could take hours? Obviously it's the former. But I talk about this to point out that you kind of have to think of these shortcuts to streamline your game to be somewhat playable, regardless of if it's historically accurate or not. See, the guys at Rockstar are really smart because they completely avoid this problem. The area of Los Santos is clearly LA, but bite-sized. This makes it easier to traverse around the map, but still keeping the illusion that this could be a city you could actually visit. Ubisoft, unfortunately, doesn't have this scapegoat to use because they use real names of places and faces and cases. And then sometimes developers will make huge changes compared to historical sources. This is in order to make the overall narrative make sense. Like for example, according to history, the Assassins and Templars were actually never mortal enemies. In fact, they were actually best buddies. I'm gonna let that sink in as we go to commercial.
Oh, hello. I need money. Alright, so here's the deal. I'm broke. Not really, but I could be richer. Sometimes I don't want to ruin the essence of a video, even though it's going to get copyrighted and I make $0 from it. Other times, certain topics or ideas feel almost non-profitable. But I still do them, because me in 50 years looking back at those videos would be much happier if I liked the video rather than if I made an extra couple bucks. And this is where Patreon comes in. We got affordable subscription plan. We got a creator advice from my couple years on YouTube. I got some knowledge I can give some of y'all guys for a couple bucks, you know what I'm saying? We got a potential Discord that I will not officially state is going to happen for legal purposes. It may or may not happen. I'm not going to confirm or deny that. Overall, it's just another method for those who want to support me that extra mile. But your views and likes and comments are definitely enough. But I do need money. At the end of the day, I am a kid trying to make his dream a reality. So, if you want to support, head over to the Patreon. Or don't subscribe to the Patreon, and I'll just stay here and try to keep myself warm.
Hey guys, How are you guys coping over the fact that your whole childhood was a lie? Yes, humans never jumped off 60-meter cliffs into conveniently placed hay bales. We never invented a hidden blade mechanic that could pierce through armor, and the assassins were never actually enemies to the Templars. In fact, the Knights Templar only came to be because the French Christian knights were inspired by the way the Order of the Assassins ran things. After getting financial backing, they decided to make their own little fan club. Meaning, for the most part, the fact that you are killing Templar leaders in Assassin's Creed 1 is probably the biggest historical inaccuracy of the whole game. After a while, the Templar Knights did in fact join in the Crusades, but by then the Assassins kind of stopped fighting the Crusaders and weren't involved in any of those wars. It was kind of at this point I had to wonder, what about these guys made Patrice say he wanted to base an entire game off of them? What made him look at these two organizations and say, even though y'all are best buds, I'm gonna make y'all fight in a made-up game? The answer is kind of simple. It's because it was cool. Think about it. On one side we have the Templars, a section of Christian knights who were a military authority in Europe and the Holy Lands. This during a time where people believed that the words of the Catholic Church were the words of God himself. They had a stupid amount of financial backing from nobles, so much so they often gave out loans, and they were the first people ever to set up a banking system. They had control and order. And on the other side, you have a smaller yet even more deadly group of assassins, or Hashashins, a Muslim militant force that specializes in slipping through enemy ranks and neutralizing political figures with a single swipe of their weapon. Now, they might not have specifically fought for it, but these guys represent freedom. Freedom from control of the enemies. Both sides fighting for what they believe. As a writer, how much easier does it get? We've seen this exact same theme all across media. Games, TV shows, books, documentaries, the whole shebang. I mean, Patrice gets the whole idea of the assassins we know after reading about them from a novel called Alamut. More on that later. But the structure of the organization is all right there for you in history. Al-Mulim, Saladin, Richard I, these guys all existed. And using them to unravel this story of beliefs is an amazing creative choice. And it does nothing but bring authenticity to the world at large. It was at this point I was reminded of a phrase I remember Ezio and Altair used to say.
Where other men blindly follow the truth, remember.
Nothing is true.
Where other men are limited by morality or law, remember.
Everything is permitted.
I wondered if that quote had any historical relevance at all. Or was it really someone in the studio like, alright man, we need these Muslims to say some old ancient proverb. I'm sure the autobiography by Dwayne Johnson will have everything we need. When I was younger, the quote sounded cool, but honestly I didn't try to put too much thought into it. Now I got time. Too much time.
You can't make this thing up.
This might be the most egregious example of Chinese whispers I have ever seen. The timeline ends with Patrice Désolé. After working on Prince of Persia that sold pretty well, Patrice wanted to work on a more ambitious game that would capitalize off the next-gen hardware. That's when he stumbled across the Alamut book, a novel about a secret society of stealth killers hidden away in the mountains. And that's when they decided on the title of a new game, Prince of Persia Assassin. This would be later changed to Assassin's Creed when they decided to make a completely new IP, but what I want you to focus on is the quote that is constantly being recited in the novel. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Patrice saw this and was like, oh, that has a nice ring to it. And then proceeded to make that the motto for the whole society he was making in the game. Alright, on the surface, this does sound cool. Maybe deep, as one would say. But the more I read it, the more confusing it gets. I've read every Reddit post, I've watched every single cutscene with this quote in it, and I've just come to the conclusion that if this is your creed, how are you an assassin?
To say that nothing is true is to realize that the foundations of society are fragile, and that we must be the shepherds of our own civilization. To say that everything is permitted is to understand that we are the architects of our actions, and that we must live with their consequences, whether glorious or tragic.
He also knows that the creed isn't the dogma, merely an observation of reality, hence explaining why some people have different explanations of it. Edward Kenway actually has a nice explanation of it as well.
It's hard to say. For if nothing is true, then why believe anything? And if everything is permitted, why not chase every desire?
Why indeed?
It might be that this idea is only the beginning of wisdom. not its final form.
Now, in my most good faith explanation of this creed, here's how I see it. To say nothing is true is to realize there is no universal truth of humanity, only what we collectively agree on at that time period. Fair enough, that makes sense to me. Question everything, everything is not what it seems. Alex Russo, 2000 and whatever, that show came out. The second part, everything is permitted, is saying that there is no higher power to punish us for our actions, only their natural consequences. Which again, I understand. My question is, however, how does any of this have to do with the assassins we see in the game? If there is no absolute truth, then what gives the assassins grounds to say their ideology wanting freedom of choice for humanity is more valuable than the Templars' ideology of attaining peace through controlling the masses against their will? If everything is permitted, then why should you feel some kind of moral indignation to save people from the Templars? With this view, there is no good side or bad side. There just is. Genuinely, I'm asking you in the comments. I feel like I'm missing something here. Guy, even looking at Ezio's explanation of the creed, he uses words like must. And that brings the idea that you should do stuff, that there is a higher power that is giving you these set of rules to follow by. God, the universe, the will, call it whatever you want, but what it sounds like to me is you are using an atheistic, moral relativist creed to justify a theistic or at least an altruistic action.
Talking about philosophy in a video game essay? You're him, Rodrigo.
I almost got rid of this section because it felt like a nothing burger pointing out something I genuinely just didn't understand. Not to mention I knew I was going to get a bunch of people in the comment section basically saying, oh,
the fact that you don't understand is the whole point of the creed.
And that answer was going to make me very mad. However, the reason why I wanted to keep it in is because I wanted to set the record straight. Because a lot of AC fans believe that the actual assassins used to say this motto. But in actuality, it was a creed made by someone else who was observing them. They never said this. The history goes like this. Gustav L. Flügel is a German linguist who was a nerd for all Oriental languages and wrote a book called this. In the book, he writes his observation of the ultimate truth of these males. He notes that
nichts zum Glauben und alles tun zu dürfen.
That's it. That's it, man. The assassins never said this among themselves. I'm not crazy. You are. We see the exact same quote being brought up by Sylvestre de Sacy, a French linguist whose claims about assassins went unchallenged without evidence for years. Guy, this is the same guy that told everyone the reason why they're called Hashashins was because they were constantly high off of hash as a form of their religion. Huh? Some nobody German named Nietzsche ended up using that quote in one of his books, and then a couple decades later, a Slovenian novelist writes a revenge story, where the main protagonist swears to avenge his nephew who died by the hands of assassins. The book was called Alamut. Patrice reads it, and the rest is history. Isn't it kind of ironic that I'm making a video about the historical accuracy in video games, and the source of a quote used in said video game is based on untrustworthy hearsay? Ain't it crazy that some things we widely recognize as historical fact might not be accurate at all? In the grand scheme of things, this is a very tiny thing to fuss about. But I don't know, this lie just got me mad for the assassins. At the end of the day, Patrice probably came across the truth while researching, but decided to just keep the code in anyways because it sounded cool. But then all this begged the question for me. How much does all this really matter? The code is cool. It fits the game pretty well. Am I just being a Grinch by pointing out that it's not historically accurate? Am I that guy? I don't want to be that guy. Why does this bother me so much? Why does this actually matter? It's kind of hard to explain why this stuff matters and why making these clarifications matter without making me sound like a crazy person. But there's a video on YouTube by Nomads, basically defending the movie Whiplash from jazz connoisseurs ripping it to shreds for it not being accurate. Their main issue is the movie is often not accurate to actual jazz playing. And while yes, a non-jazz musician can honestly watch this movie and be ignorant to the shortcuts and inaccuracies on display, Nomad's argument is if it's for the sake of the narrative and it feels authentic, then it's done its job.
So in terms of accuracy, I would probably give it like a 3 out of 10.
And again, for a movie as riddled in context as Whiplash is, trying to rate these scenes based purely on accuracy, yeah, of course they're not going to be accurate, because the whole point is that they're not trying to play jazz perfectly in this scene. There's a bunch of mental battles going on, and these videos do absolutely nothing to portray that.
If Whiplash didn't evoke any kind of authenticity, the movie wouldn't have been as popular as it is, and the conversation would have just never been had. Again, it's important to mention these inaccuracies and discuss the why part of why they would change things up to reality, especially if I can make the argument that sticking to real life rather than really exercising a creative license would have actually made a better authentic game. If you're going to use history as a backdrop to your video game, at least do it justice. Catering to fans too much in the sense of portraying history as they want to see history is dangerous. Okay, maybe not dangerous, just disappointing. Sorry, I was trying to make this video essay seem like some end of the world thing, but it doesn't really matter. No one's going to be actually satisfied having their expectations perfectly met. Everybody wants to be overwhelmed, but if you're just going to show history through a trendy, more modern lens, then Assassin's Creed kind of loses its edge. And now you've contributed to the false stereotypes false history has made, with little to no payoff to making a better game. An example of this is the Midnight Ride during Assassin's Creed 3. You, the player, has to accompany Paul Revere as you ride by horse through Lexington, alerting local militia about the British army that was approaching. Now, American folklore and poems and songs and stuff make Paul Revere this singular hero who warned his brothers in arms for the incoming attack on their supplies, thus allowing the Americans to make a stand at Lexington and Concord.
I believe we are on course. This way, Connor. This way, Connor. Go left up here. Go left up here. To the right, Connor. To the right.
The real history is there was actually 5 riders who warned Lexington about the British. Some who covered significantly more distance than Paul Revere did during the exact same time. Maybe if they showed the full 5 riders, the mission could be Connor going from place to place, getting rid of British troops that were in their way. I don't know. I wrote the script at midnight. So look, I'm not the writer. I'm just the guy who talks about the writer. Instead, they just kept Paul Revere as the hero and kept the status quo and made a boring mission. Assassin's Creed is kind of a mixed bag with some really great character portrayals and then some character depictions being just straight up character assassinations. Pun intended. The reason why it varies so much is because they sometimes just omit and take out full character personalities from certain people, and they just feel incomplete when you play the game. They might just show one side of them in the whole game, again keeping the status quo, and they just feel kind of half-baked. I found multiple characters that if they just kept to the more historical side rather than just wiping the slate clean and making this fake character, the game just would have been better. It just would have been better. It would have made the character more believable and thus bringing the authenticity of the whole game up a notch. And one of the most interesting cases of these weird omissions of character traits is definitely in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. More specifically, the Borgias. From Assassin's Creed 2 to Revelations, we follow the story of Ezio Auditore, an Italian nobleman turned assassin as the unjust death of his family radicalizes him to taking his birthright and becoming an assassin. In Assassin's Creed 2, the overarching villain is Rodrigo Borgia, and the sequel that takes place directly after you defeat Rodrigo has the antagonist be his son, Cesare Borgia, with his sister Lucrezia playing a secondary role too. Before we get into it, I think it's actually worth mentioning that Ubisoft actually had a 30-second history rule. The rule basically states that if you can look up something and find it within 30 seconds when it comes to historical accuracy, then you just leave it. Don't touch it. It stays the way it is. It's also worth mentioning that this section is me retroactively critiquing character writing of some of my favorite games of all time. So if I come off as pretentious and like I know it all, that's not what I'm trying to do. What this is really is a dad watching his kid at a talent show put on a mediocre performance compared to the spectacular showing they had for him back at the house. And frustratingly, he's balling his fist saying, "Honey, why don't you show them your material?" Also, shout out to this dude on Reddit. Basically made a Cinema Sins essay on every single Assassin's Creed showing what's historically accurate and what's not. I will be referencing them a lot in this video. So with Assassin's Creed 2 and furthermore Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Ubisoft did this thing where they made their villains cartoonishly evil. When in reality, if you look at the context of that world back then, they were kind of acting according to the status quo. Let's start with the man that started it all. Daddy Pope, Rodrigo Borgia. In real life, the Borgias were a cunning and feared family, military and politically wise, and Rodrigo is the head of all this. He was constantly marrying his family into potential enemies in Spain, France, Italy, so no matter what, the Borgia family would always come out on top. That, along being a cardinal in the Catholic Church during a time where the Catholic Church actually had military and political influence, you gotta give it to him. This Spanish immigrant made a name for himself in Italy. Not only that, but he did so while being the most unholy holy man there was. First off, he had like 5 kids out of wedlock with multiple women, all while being a cardinal and then later a pope, a position he basically bought his way into as he paid basically half of the cardinals to vote for him in the conclave. It's also reported that he used to host orgies in the Vatican Palace, one of the most famous ones being called the Battle of the Chestnuts. I'm gonna let you guys just imagine how they got the title of that thing. What's up, guys? Editor Miorski here. I'm just editing the video as we speak. And I kind of was just doing some research as I was just in between breaks, and I found a little mistake. I made this, just a little mistake, but I caught it, and I'm here to address it. So the Battle of the Chestnuts actually wasn't a battle to, you know, swing around your dang-a-lang. No, it wasn't that. Allegedly, he hired like 50 prostitutes into the Vatican, and the game was they had to grovel over chestnuts while naked old men chased them down and try to have sex with them. And that's why it's called the Battle of the Chestnuts. Yeah. Now, take this story with a grain of salt. It's just a funny little story, but it probably was made up. At the time, the Borgias had a lot of enemies. They probably made it up. It's probably more slander, but it's worth putting in because I think it's kind of funny. At the same time, this guy is a pope with 5 kids, so I'm not surprised if he's into some devious stuff on the off hours of talking to God. This guy had so much pull, he made his first son Giovanni the head of the papal commander army. Then his other son Cesare instantly became a cardinal the second he finished his theological studies. Probably the first guy I've seen to really show the power of nepotism. I mean, outside of his uncle, who was also a pope. I say this all to say, by making a man who has a track record of gaining control and influence very, very rapidly be the antagonistic force against the people that fight for freedom and peace is a great choice for a video game. The methodical planning and actions by him honestly made the Borgias into a real-life mob family in the Renaissance. My question is, why isn't this focused at all in Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood? The majority of Assassin's Creed 2 has Rodrigo being this hooded figure that's calling the shots from the darkness, but we don't really see him show off that he's cunning and well prepared. Multiple times in the game does he have a run-in with Ezio, and he escapes Ezio each time, not because of his planning or his tactical skills. Basically, the game hasn't decided he's going to die yet, so they gotta continue progressing the plot, and Ezio is just being an idiot. It's like every time he meets Rodrigo, he just forgets he's a killing machine. It's either that or Rodrigo is a retired boxer, because I ain't gonna lie, he be boxing.
And I'm swerving in the streets, got you nervous that I'm really murking murder on the beat. Hey, get the fuck out of my way.
I would have loved to see scenes or at least some stories about how Rodrigo was so cutthroat in getting to the place he was. Guy, I mean, come on. He became the Pope off screen. When I was researching for this video and I was looking up stuff to do with Rodrigo, I found his wiki, and there's actually like a specific story he had before AC2, and it details his numerous confrontations with Giovanni Auditore. Giovanni, Ezio's dad, was this close to exposing Rodrigo's plans of basically wiping out all the Italian leaders and replacing them with Templar leaders. Guy, this is from a 30-minute movie they put on YouTube on the official Assassin's Creed YouTube channel. Where was this in the game? The movie details how he was able to stop Giovanni, meaning that his plans were kept secret. Rodrigo could have honestly been on some Palpatine level 4D chess, but they just didn't put it in the game. Just how motivated would we be as the player if we saw glimpses of Ezio's dad and this guy going back and forth, and then him killing Ezio's dad, and now Ezio is now taking this, like, cinema! Unfortunately, Brotherhood isn't much better because they don't really do much with his character altogether. Towards the end, he tries to poison his son ends up poisoning him, and he just dies. That was it. Speaking of his son, Cesare in the games is shown off to be this pompous, rich aristocrat who is more so a threat because of his impulsive choices rather than him being an actual competent leader. This obsession he has to control all of Italy makes him just lash out on anybody he ever meets. And of course, he's gotta have that little bit of God complex, as he's always comparing himself to God and being above mortals. Yada yada, you've seen this before. The sad reality is he's actually a far cry to the actual Cesare, and it makes me so sad. Some shady stuff happens and his brother unexpectedly dies, so he's now the papal army leader. But the thing is, he gains the achievements and the success to warrant his rank and his role, because this dude was, and he really was, good at war. His conquest spread as far as the Romagna Emilia region, and he was so good at war, a dude named King John III tried to hire him to lead in his own war campaign. This dude's from France. Why is he hiring an Italian to lead the army? It is a war crime to portray him as an incompetent rich boy. Guy, because let me tell you, the one villain archetype I hate the most is a villain who has a superiority complex with no substance. Because instead of having this epic clash between a master assassin and a decorated war veteran, the game instead makes it a wild goose chase, getting rid of all the multiple roadblocks in the road before you can even get in a room with this guy. The opening sequence of Brotherhood shows Cesare's attack on Ezio's home in Montegione, instantly attacking with cannons and platoons of soldiers. Huh, the real Cesare would never fight like this. First off, this battle never happened, okay? Cesare's conquest never reached as far as Montegione, like how do you pronounce it? But we can look at his siege on Forfoli as reference to his fighting. It was a battle to capture his political rival, Caterina Sforza, as a hostage. Cesare tried to negotiate surrender multiple times, put a price on Sforza's head, and then, and only then, did he enact the siege. Guy, this version of Cesare is literally just waving his hands out in the open to die. Guy, if this guy Ezio didn't focus too much on his little Ezio the night before, he would have had the time and energy to air assassinate him in a second. Video game Cesare feels like a guy with unlimited resources and terrible efficiency. He actually reminds me of how I play Civ 5. Just keep throwing troops at a city and maybe in 80 to 90 years, it'll fall. I mean, come on. The final clash with Ezio and Cesare in the game just shows Cesare running with his tail between his legs. Guy, but in actuality, he died in a crazed run of bravery, chasing down a bunch of knights in the siege of Vienna and then getting ambushed. We could have gotten one of the coolest back and forth narrative fights in the whole franchise. And instead, we got King Joffrey. Even just throwing in a cutscene or two showing Cesare's martial might would have just gone leaps and bounds into making me believe that this guy is somebody that's Ezio's rival or opponent or whatever you want to say. Him convincingly beating Ezio in their first fight would have given the player a sense of scale. Make that final fight just as much satisfying to show just where you were and where you are now in terms of fighting Cesare. But we just didn't get that. I am telling you, this guy Cesare was a bad dude. So bad, in fact, Niccolo Machiavelli made him the main protagonist on his book on how a prince should act. For context, Niccolo Machiavelli was one of the most greatest minds politically and philosophically at the time. And he believed as a leader, what matters most is the job getting done. Morality always falls second. So you can imagine how fascinated he was seeing this man take over city after city, controlling the masses with an iron grip. Being ruthless and cutthroat ultimately brought peace and unity to those parts of Italy. And this was a time where Italy was very unstable, and constant wars and states being controlled by different states, factions rising rapidly and increasing rapidly. And that brings me to a side note. Machiavelli is an assassin in the game. In fact, he's even Ezio's right-hand man in Rome. I'd argue, I think it would be better if Machiavelli was actually on Cesare's side, not Ezio's. I already told you that he got on well with Cesare and they both agreed on a lot of ideas together, but he would also follow him in all these campaigns as he wrote his book. The only allies he has in this game are people that are with him when he's thriving, so when he's on the back foot, you can imagine how it went down. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad narrative choice because there's actually a cool parallel seeing Cesare and Ezio at the beginning of the game. Towards the end of the game, Cesare having nothing and Ezio gaining a brotherhood.
Say that again?
But after researching, I think I just have an issue of them just not really showing Cesare in any kind of intimidating light. There isn't some ideological battle to chew on with Assassin's Creed 1. Clearly, the assassins are the right ones here because this dude isn't even a full-fledged Templar. One last thing on Cesare. He caught syphilis later in his life because he was doing the devil's tango with one too many women, and I guess one of them, you know. This resulted in him having to wear a leather black mask everywhere he went because his face was now horribly disfigured. I don't know how much of an easier layup you can get. A black leather mask. You know how cool that final fight would be if Ezio was fighting Dr. Doom? While I don't actively hate how they did Lucrezia, Cesare's sister, in the game, I think it was a little harsh and nothing really new to the game that we didn't see before. The rumors of her sleeping around and having a secret relationship with her brother are the two things history loves to hark on about her, but honestly, these are probably not true. You have to remember that the Borgias had a lot of enemies, and it was in their best interest that people looked at these Borgias with a bad look. It's a very big chance that these guys just spread these rumors to discredit their name, and the thing is, people just believed it without a shred of evidence. I mean, maybe if there was some history reports of a cross-eyed baby randomly that came into the family, I'd believe it, but no. Alright, they did her dirty. Because look at the context. She was 13 when her dad became the Pope and she had her first husband. By 21, she was already on her third husband. And after her second husband died, really serious rumors of her poisoning people were just spreading around like wildfire. She was probably just a political tool for her brother and her dad to elevate in status by marrying her into different places of power. It's probably more likely that she was grouped in with these monsters, and people just assumed she was a monster too. If anything, a cool angle the game could have taken is make her a victim of her family. And with some convincing from Ezio, she could have been the assassin's way of knowing all the ins and outs of the Borgias. That is way better than a character just saying, oh, my spies said this about this person and we know this because XYZ. You could have Lucrezia feel bad about her complacency as innocents suffer at the hands of her family and is now determined on redeeming herself by snitching on them. Heck, she doesn't even have to be a good guy. You could probably just play the angle that she's lonely. And Ezio coddling up with her is Ezio's way of getting information out of her. Don't think Ezio was above that. I know you guys didn't play that side mission where he was feeling her up. She can't be this evil brother-loving maniac. She was a big patron of art at the time. And no one in history has ever loved the arts and at the same time done inhumane acts of murdering people. The overall theme in Brotherhood is restoration. Restoration for Ezio's family, restoration from the Borgia rule, and restoration for Rome, being once again one of Europe's melting pots for art, culture, and history, thus the Renaissance. In the game, it's heavily implied that Rome's sorry, poor, and underdeveloped state is because of the policies and leadership of the Borgias. You, as the player, work along with your assassins to renovate stores and architecture, replace Borgia influence with assassin influence, and systematically lessen the grip Cesare has on Rome by killing all of his allies. This obviously works narratively, as it wouldn't make sense to free Rome if Rome was already thriving under Borgia rule, so I get it, but it's still wrong. You can't talk about the boom of the Renaissance without talking about the Borgias, because believe it or not, they positively affected art and culture at the time. They were big patrons of a lot of famous artists. Granted, most of the artists probably had a gun to their head, so they had no choice but to make art for them, but still net positive. They had a separate room installed in the Vatican, dedicating it to some of Rome's most amazing art. They even got portraits done by the red and blue mutant ninja turtle, so GG's man. Instead of making the Borgias these cartoon villains, what they could have done is make it a battle of ideals. Maybe the reason why Rome is doing well under Borgia rule is because they're thriving off the backs of people that don't have a say in their lives. And the assassins want people to thrive while still having freedom of choice. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, man. I think I'm just still hung over the fact we didn't get Giga Chad Viltrumite Cesare. Also, let's be real. While it is true that these guys were some rich scumbags of the past, so was everyone else. Like, at least they did some good with the money they had to the people around them. That's more I could say for a lot of the figures back then. Because the climate of the time was to be as corrupt and messed up as possible. And some of these figures are even on Ezio's side throughout the games. Machiavelli thought it was fine to murder innocents as long as you keep the stability as a leader. Lorenzo de' Medici is an ally of Ezio in Assassin's Creed 2, but in actuality, he was known for using his family's wealth to enact bribery and violence to control the Florentine Republic. Caterina Sforza, Ezio's fling throughout the games, was once under siege in Fort Forli, was severely outnumbered and refused every gesture of surrender despite how hopeless the situation was. And by the time Cesare captured the fort, the people were relieved that they were no longer under Sforza's rule. Overall, the Ezio games are kinda messy when it comes to character writing and tying it back in with history, but it honestly wasn't that bad. It was just kind of cool to look at the actual history for some of these guys. You can tell it very much kept on the rails of authenticity, and that 30-second rule was definitely implemented. I just kind of wish there was more nuance between the two sides, so there wasn't an objective evil or objective good, but beggars can't be choosers. Alright, so a game can clearly take its liberties in terms of accuracy to offer a more gamey experience. Making these guys these super villains made it more easier to hate them and attack them in the video game, I guess. But it doesn't really feel authentically real at times if you do too much. Even when I was younger, I didn't really feel like these guys were that threatening. I just played along with the story because the missions were fun. And that's what it's all about, right? Fun. But what happens if the games aren't fun? I don't mean when someone isn't nuanced enough or someone just feels too cartoony. I'm talking about even if you know the smallest bit of history from historical media, and then a game forces certain groups to fight against other groups when it doesn't make any sense at all in history to do that. Yeah, it kind of irks you. Assassin's Creed 3 this time is set between the 7 Years' War all the way to the end of the American Revolution, with you playing as 2 separate characters in each section respectively. The latter you play for the majority of the game, while the former is basically a prequel to the main story. Before we talk about anything else, can I just say that I also loved this game growing up. Like bro, look at this. The game felt like a great title after Brotherhood just to sink my teeth into when I was younger. But I have to admit, I was also 14 when I played it. So back then, I was ignorant to the wishy-washy plot, the dumb character motivations, and the wasted potential people many years later would speak about on YouTube or online in general. So going forward, just know that these are words for more or less a retired Assassin's Creed fan, but I still have this view of it when I was younger that I just was obsessed with this game. For me, Brotherhood is like there, and then like 3 is just like slightly there, with Revelations kind of being a little like 2 notches down as well. And I imagine Black Flag would be on the same level as Brotherhood, but I never played Black Flag, unfortunately. Sorry guys, I know you guys are mad at me, but sorry for being poor. What I'm still focusing on is the historical inaccuracies and the overall authenticity of the game. And this game has some stuff to talk about, okay? AC3 is a mixed bag of great use of history and then also weird omissions of history. And the 2 best examples to explain this are the stories of Connor and Charles Lee. But in order to explain the absolute forced shoehorn of a character Connor is, let's talk about the GOAT, Charles, for a second. So the historical Charles Lee is actually split into 2 characters in the game. That being the video game Charles Lee and Haytham Kenway. This is what they call in the industry decomposited characters. Imagine I'm holding a wine cup. That's how you know I'm poor. I said wine cup, wine glass. Game version of Charles Lee has the historical Charles Lee's insulting, bad temper, and quite pompous attitude, while Haytham got the common sense, logical thinking, and his baby making skills with the natives. Yeah, so the fact that Connor is the son of Haytham in the game is taken from the rumor, more or less fact, that Charles Lee had a kid with a woman from the Mohawk tribe. Not just any woman though, the chieftain's daughter, with whom they had twins actually. So that's cool. Maybe they could have made an Assassin's Creed game where, you know, the twins get separated at birth, but no one would play that. Anyway, Charles Lee was a bit of a deadbeat and abandoned them, but I guess alimony wasn't really a thing back then, so they didn't really chase him down to be the father of these guys' kids and carried on with their day. Yeah, I don't know why they were still on good terms with Lee. You could use this weird sense of grace they had for Lee to explain the villagers' trust in Lee over Connor in the game, and why Connor's best friend growing up believed Lee over Connor. Kind of. They never mentioned Lee having kids in the tribe, so this is a really dumb cliche. I hate when characters that have known each other for years just can't talk it out. They just gotta kill each other for some reason. All reason goes out the window. I know, it really comes off as stupid, but hey, there's a lot about this plot that's stupid. Before the time skip in the game, Charles Lee is more timid and very much a shadow subordinate to Haytham Kenway. But after the time skip, Charles changes completely. First off, he looks like a hobo with a very disheveled, unclean look. He has a completely different outfit, which is actually a reference to his time fighting in Portugal, and I guess he just never decided to take it off and carry it with him to America, I don't know. Setting him up to be the overarching villain, video game Charles Lee was the one who incites the Boston Massacre. A real nice touch from the developers because it's recorded in history how it's murky on who exactly shot the first shot, but whoever did set the British troops on edge and caused them to open fire into the crowd. He also makes some minor appearances in some other major events, but what I want to focus on is his relationship with another historical figure. You see, Charles in 7075 switched sides. He joined the fight with the colonies against the British army, thinking because he had this decorated military career in the Europes, he thought he'd be a shoo-in for the role of commander-in-chief of the entire American army. But Congress was like, hell no. Charles back then had a reputation for being a hot-headed Brit and was very difficult to work with. His temper was so well known that the natives gave him a nickname, Boiling Water. A person like that wasn't going to be the spearhead America needed in charge, so instead they made him the third-ranking general. Still very high, but this angered Charles. It infuriated him. The Boiling Water Man was in full effect. And this brings up that relationship I was talking about the game shows, because I ran across a series of events that detail just how absolutely vengeful this man Charles Lee can be. Charles Lee didn't take rejection very well, and he focused all his energy to hating on the man that took, in his opinion, his rightful place as Commander-in-Chief. What I'm going to talk about now makes me confidently appoint Charles Lee as America's most petty hater. And the person who was on the tail end of this hate was none other than a certain George Washington. First of all, he constantly sent letters to Congress asking them to revoke their decision in making Washington the commander-in-chief and make him the commander-in-chief. One of these times he messed up and actually sent one of these letters to Washington. Washington didn't really take much action, but he kind of had in his head like, okay, this guy does not like me. This was never in the game, but I think it would have been pretty funny if they added it in. What's weird is that the hate was really one-sided. Washington actually kind of liked Charles Lee. He respected him for his martial might and his decorated career. And one time when they met up in New York in honor of Charles Lee's efforts, Washington changed one of the fort's names from Fort Constitution to Fort Lee. And Charles Lee did not care.
How do you think you've done on the day?
I don't really give a shit. I'm not gonna lie, bruv.
I think Lee was a great choice for an antagonistic force because around the same time, people kind of knew that Charles Lee just did not like Washington. There was rumors about a plot for Washington's life and an assassination attempt. Now, what soldier in the American Revolution would want such a thing? In the game, Lee and his Templar buddies planned to assassinate Washington, so Lee could be appointed commander-in-chief and the Templars could rule America from the shadows. I love this. This is very Templar-esque to have people on either side of the war, so no matter what, they're in control. My favorite example of Lee being a hater is the Battle of Monmouth. The Cliff Notes version of this event is this. Washington asks Lee to lead an army to flank the retreating British troops at Monmouth. He refuses. Washington asks a French commander named Lafayette to lead. For whatever reason, Lee changes his mind and becomes the commander with Lafayette in the secondary role. The plan goes accordingly. As the British troops were retreating and Lee's army were ready to flank, Lee calls for a complete retreat. Lafayette is like, what the hell, and snitches on Lee to Washington. Lee runs into Washington on retreat and Washington is like, what the hell? Washington embarrasses and insults Lee in front of everyone. Lee shouts back and is charged for insubordination. Lee ends up going to court for his crimes and in 1779 he is found guilty of being an idiot. This is basically how it happened in the game. But this is the DLC part I really wanted them to keep in because the saga continues. According to history, Lee continues to publicly call out and talk smack about Washington in the papers. Washington's men see this and say, hey man, stop talking smack about Washington and actually challenge him to a duel. If you're bad, he challenges Washington to a duel and loses. Multiple times. He also at one point gets captured by the British as he was drunk in a bar and then willingly proceeds to tell all of Washington's tactics and battle plans to the British, willing to sell out the whole army just to undermine Washington. Crazy. At the end of the game, Lee ends up dying at the hands of Connor for good, for being a Templar. Stabbed in the chest, bleeding out in the same bar the historical Lee died. So now that Lee is dead, you would think that Connor has finished his job as an assassin and protector of his village. But what I failed to mention before was, one of the reasons Connor pursued Lee throughout the game wasn't only because he was a Templar, but because Connor remembers seeing Lee almost moments before his village was burnt down. Obviously, Connor puts 2 and 2 together and concludes that Lee had something to do with the tragic event. However, he finds out well before he kills Lee that Lee wasn't responsible for the event. It was done on orders from none other than Washington. Washington heard that Connor's tribe was giving information to the British and that they needed to be exterminated. Almost twice in the game if Connor hadn't read Washington's letter. Knowing this, you would think that Connor would then go for Washington plot-wise, right? But he doesn't. Which finally brings me into the discussion I wanted to have about Connor. Ladies and gentlemen, I can astutely conclude that Connor is a big, fat, old coon. So this could be seen as a general issue with the whole Assassin's Creed story, but it ties back into history. There's an elephant in the room when speaking about the story of Assassin's Creed because it all falls apart when you question, why would Connor, someone of Native American descent, side with the Americans? Connor's tribe is the Mohawk tribe of the Iroquois people, and both the game and actual history depict them siding with the British. Americans were constantly encroaching on their land, and whether they were going to hold up on their end of the deal or not, the British did promise that they would sort out their issue and respect their boundaries. Plus, the Mohawk tribe actually had good relations with the British and traded with them for years before the war. So him aiding Washington fighting against Redcoats, even for the reason that maybe he sees all of Britain as Templars, it just kind of makes him look like a... I didn't mention it before, but there's a scene where Connor and Haytham confront Washington about a plan, and they read a letter from Washington basically explaining how they are attacking Connor's village because he heard rumors of this village siding with the British and giving them information. And it's there when Connor decides to completely cut ties with George Washington, but honestly, there never should have been a shaking of hands. Now, I trust YouTube, so there's probably someone in the comments saying, duh, he's not fighting for the Americans, he's fighting for the assassins. And that's fair, to be honest. You thought I was going to make fun of that person, though. That's actually a fair point. But that's only fair if his one and only goal was to fight against the Templars. But as this guy on Reddit explains, Connor is hyper motivated. They give him way too many motivations to go on his hero's journey. Initially, you could say what motivated him was the burning down of his village when he was young, and his only lead to figuring out who did this was one white man who showed up just before it happened. By the way, Charles Lee didn't start the fire, and it's never really explained why he's there. He's just there. But then he also gets a vision in his sleep to become an assassin. But then he also finds out his dad is a Templar. But the problem here is you can't pursue all of these motivations at the same time. Multiple times Connor will say the protection of his village is his #1 priority, but then his other motivations sometimes are at odds with the protection of his village. The assassin motivation and the Templar dad thing weave pretty well, but sometimes his obsession of killing Charles Lee blinds his goal of being an assassin or protecting his village. Not to mention he's always helping out the Americans, I guess hoping for some kind of you scratch my back, I scratch your back kind of thing, but duh, it doesn't happen, it's Americans. If I'm being good faith, you could say he was naive and try to juggle too many things at the same time. In any other kind of faith, you would say this is just lazy writing. You might say he had no other choice than to fight for the colonies. Except he did. He could have just been impartial to the war and just killed who he needed to kill in order to protect his village, or Templars, or whoever. Like, there's too many things here you're juggling with when you have like 4 different motivations. I guess historians made a fuss about this because, in defense of Connor, one of the top historians at Ubisoft, Maxime Durand, said this:
The Iroquois Confederacy was destroyed during the American Revolution. They all ended up fighting each other. We don't take the majority view that historians used to 50 or 60 years ago. The philosophy today is that history is more about different points of view. We just want to make a fun game that can sell. That's what a video game is. It's not a book, in other words. Is any video game 100% accurate? No. But neither is there any history that is either.
Bro, what the fuck is you even talking about, bro?
I'm not gonna lie, I definitely got a call cap on that. This is 100% a cop-out answer. Why did they choose a tribe that is documented to be allied with the British? The same tribe that Charles Lee had great relations with. And we're not mad when he dipped out on them after he impregnated the chief's daughter. The same tribe that, despite him being a bit of an opportunist at times, the Templar William Johnson also had great relations with in real life. The same William Johnson that had 2 wives with them and was acting ambassador in the British Council in order to give them military aid against the French multiple times. Sure, you can make the argument that Connor was the one exception in his tribe because he was an assassin and he hated the Templar British, but the issue still stands. Why choose the Mohawk tribe? Why not choose another tribe for his origin? I don't get it. Guy, there was plenty of other tribes that were in the South that actually supported the Americans, so why? Why? Well, because the name Mohawk from the Mohawk tribe sounds cool and is more recognizable to the player. History and media have a weird relationship where sometimes not only does history inform media, but sometimes media can inform history, ergo changing the original context of the history entirely. This new pseudo-history now becomes the status quo, and any other deviation like going back to the original history is met with arguments like it's not recognizable enough, it's not popular enough, it doesn't remind the general mass media of what they think that history is supposed to look like. I'm gonna call this mutation of history pop history. Pop history is the reason why, while I think the guys at Ubisoft definitely knew the proper history of some of these characters and events, they knew there was a specific history that was more popularly known amongst gamers and the mass media at large. And if a main goal for a game is to sell well, I can see why they chose the popular history rather than the actual history at times. But the rules and restraints they used to have when talking about history in their video games, as the games went by, they just no longer tried to keep those rules or respect them at all. To the point where I think that 30-second rule was just thrown out the window at one point. Take Vikings, for example. When you think of Vikings, what are the images and the words that are popping into your head? Dirty, gritty, rough looking, barbaric. That's usually how most media depict them as. The Anglo-Saxon sources of the Vikings was that they were very neatly dressed people. They always wore rich garments, combed their hair, and effortlessly seduced English women with their manners. In AC Valhalla, they're dressed as a biker gang. Well, now I just feel like I've just done a full circle. I'm just being a Grinch again and saying, actually, like, I don't really know what to do with the script now. I don't know what else to say. If Assassin's Creed is a sci-fi fictional story, is it a cop-out explanation to say that they were never going to be historical or true to the actual events at the time? But wait, no, hold on. You can't say that. They insist on getting their dates right. The architecture is mostly right. They just swap out more known features to make it more palatable. What I'm doing isn't bad faith, is it? No, it's not. I am giving them their flowers when they deserve it, and I'm pointing out times when I think they could have done better. It's not my fault that the more recent games don't make any sense. I'm red-pilled. I see the reality of this now. They're just changing stuff with no real payoff other than marketability. Who honestly is going to get a better gaming experience by making Vikings have these more movie iconic tattoos, face paintings, and leather armor? I'm allowed to point that out. The story and the game at times just doesn't feel authentic, and then I look under the surface and I realize, oh, that's why it's not authentic. But the only people annoyed right now are probably historians. And also the dead Vikings probably rolling in their graves right now because people now think that they worship pagan gods and what looks like a Christian temple god. Oh my gosh, man. I don't know. I kind of feel like the bad guy, but it's kind of fun to point out the assholes they are doing because these are some crazy assholes. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you get to fight for the Spartans or the Greeks and fight for the domination of the land according to their respective armies. This game mechanic of area capture has been done in Assassin's Creed games for years. The reason why it doesn't work here specifically is that it breaks the whole mold of the Peloponnesian War because the reason why it was so famous was because no side could ever get an upper hand on the other. There's a comment I saw on a YouTube video when I was researching that kind of encapsulates this whole thing of showing the popular version of this whole narrative in history. He goes on about the history and Odyssey reminds him of something his history teacher professor once said. A classmate had asked him what popular film was the most historically accurate he'd seen. And his reply was, 300 is the most accurate film to how Spartans would have retold the Battle of Thermopylae. To me, it just seems like it's less about who these people actually were, and it's more about who we as modern people perceive them as. With all this stuff I've talked about, you're probably thinking, you can't perfect authenticity in a historical game at all and also make it a pseudo-history lesson. No way, no way. Or can you? Ghost of Tsushima is the big brother that Assassin's Creed wishes it was. It very clearly knows what it wants its audience to feel, and handles its history much better than Assassin's Creed ever did because it has a different scope to Assassin's Creed. From the jump, it sets itself up to be a completely made up story but set in historical elements. The invasion of the Mongols did in fact happen on Tsushima Island, but instead of the weeks and months the game portrays, it only lasted 4 days. With over 8,000 Mongols overwhelming the mere 80 samurai in the first clash. Jin, his uncle and his clan, fake. The antagonist, fake. Even the fact that you use samurai armor and katanas isn't accurate because they weren't even invented until a couple hundred years after. So what we're seeing here is a what-if scenario of a game that takes historical elements but is not rooted in ancient history. It's actually rooted in the 1900s with Kurosawa films. Akira Kurosawa was a Japanese indie filmmaker who is arguably one of the most influential filmmakers of all time. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Django Unchained, A Bug's Life. These colossal blockbuster movies in cinema all credit Kurosawa in some way to an aspect of their films. And what Ghost of Tsushima took from Kurosawa, the samurai standoffs, the combat, the lighting, the camera angles and color grading, it really, and this is the second time I'm saying this in the script, makes you feel like a samurai. And guess what? Everyone's happy. It feels authentic, no one is misled egregiously into inaccurate depictions of history because the game wears its ahistorical inspiration on its sleeve instead of telling you it's not historical and then attempting to make a historical game in most aspects, just not a very good job at it. I don't particularly enjoy talking about Assassin's Creed like this. Despite all this, the concept of the franchise is still very cool to me. The whole narrative in Assassin's Creed games is that history is not always what it seems, and throughout humanity there's been a secret war going on, and the outcome of these battles has shaped history since the beginning. Whether it's the struggle of dominance in the Holy Wars, the American Revolution, or major shifts in the political state of countries, what we see on the surface is public figures going back and forth, but really they're often backed by the Assassins or the Templars. Remember Da Vinci and his inventions he was rumored to design poorly on purpose? Well, he did it because he didn't want the Templars to use it. Remember the Apple of Eden? It's actually based on the fact that a lot of powerful leaders during the medieval and Renaissance times were seen holding this golden ball as a symbol of power. The globus cruciger. Oh my gosh, that's such an interesting fact. Like, hold on. The fact they saw that and implemented that, I have to give them props. The more you peel back the layers of this stuff, the more enjoyment you get from the creative choices that they make. It's like listening to a song and realizing that the lyrics have multiple layers to it. Or you're watching a Marvel movie and you're like, oh my god, there's a cameo, I know this guy. He's finally here. But nowadays, it's like once that cameo effect wears off, all you're left with is a mediocre performance and a completely different depiction from the comics. So now you have two reasons to be angry. If you think all my rambling for the past XXX minutes is interesting but really doesn't affect your gameplay whatsoever with Assassin's Creed, then I don't think I'll ever skew or change your mind. And you're not wrong for liking the more modern games. But the it's just a game and it doesn't matter argument, or honestly the sections of the script that I legit didn't know how to really attack because I didn't want to be disingenuous. Because I also just couldn't care about the inaccuracies with other IPs, as long as it feels somewhat immersive to me. So I'd be a hypocrite forcing you to care about something just because I care. But here's some words from some people that can 100% articulate what I'm trying to say better.
You know, they could have done that, and instead they chose to break from this asset they had, that they could draw on lesser known but factually confirmed things about these people and put them in the game and increase that feeling of authenticity that way. Because if you just go into a game like this and get only what you expect, you know, it reinforces your preconceptions, but it doesn't immerse you to the same degree, you know? Yeah, it's like you're immersing yourself in like room temperature water. It's like, well, no surprises in here. Yeah, but then you hit the little squeaky rubber ducky that is Da Vinci and you're like, wow, what a vibrant character this is.
And the thing is, Ubisoft isn't hurting from this. Valhalla is their best-selling Assassin's Creed game ever, with Odyssey at second. Now that could be for multiple reasons, but the general gist is they've learned the lesson that creating a game with popular history rather than one that's historically rooted is more profitable and easy to do. If you're watching this, Assassin's Creed Shadows is out, and it's probably bad and expensive. But I hope at least you know that if people are saying it's bad because of historical inaccuracies, you know they're more so talking about authenticity. And a female shinobi or a black samurai isn't going to break that authenticity. What does break that authenticity is what the NPCs are idly doing and what they're wearing. It's if the streets and architecture fit the environment. It's if the weapons and combat feel authentic to the time period. It's if the characters are written to be believable people. Developers know it's much smarter to annoy historians, even if the things they add are 100 years too early, if it means that the majority of people playing their game get to enjoy a more recognizable or iconic feature. Because let's be real, if they decided to not have samurai swords because katanas weren't invented during that time, not a single person complaining before on the internet would be waving for historical accuracy then. Maybe you could shift the time setting when swords were first invented, but maybe that means that all your other big events in history are off. It's sticky, I admit, but I'm not gonna sit here and say it's impossible. This video was kind of tough to make. Just like so many other videos, researching and analyzing hyperfixations from my childhood no longer allows me to look at it from a casual, non-critical lens. I could have continued my life knowing that modern Ubisoft is a dumpster fire, but the old Ubisoft was flawless. But after doing this video, I'd realize it wasn't. It's just saddening that these flaws are the things I care about now, so it deeply disturbs me looking at it. But I recognize that this is a Pandora's box specific to me. For the mass majority, these historical blunders, executed well or not, doesn't really matter as long as the game looks cool and is fun to play. I hope it's clear that I still believe that Assassin's Creed is a net positive, despite the fact it was my punching bag for this video and many others for the past decade. Because in an ironic video essay kind of way, Patrice's words still hold true for me. Assassin's Creed is a Trojan horse. I'm probably not interpreting this as he intended. Definitely not in the way he intended, but it got me curious. Doing this video and seeing where they could have done better has got me into history more than the games have ever done since I first played Brotherhood back in 2013. And I've seen online people have the same story. Some went to pursue history degrees because of Assassin's Creed. Others were able to breathe in a sense of familiarity by walking through these places that have meaning to them and their families. Maybe this isn't a good sentence to say out loud, but Assassin's Creed isn't the end-all be-all for historical authenticity. But maybe a better way of looking at it is it's the beginning of wanting to be curious about the world and its history. Damn it! Oh, wow, what a full circle. I swear, if that's what Edward meant when he said this, I've been completely outplayed. From a gameplay's perspective with the more modern titles, it's still debatable on if the history omissions made a worse off game. I think for most people, if the environment feels authentic, that's more than enough. And that's one thing you can't take away from Ubisoft games. Maybe the actual specifics may be wrong, but the overall environment look of the games are always amazing. This is the most unsatisfying conclusion I have ever made. But that's just the thing, there's so much nuance with this conversation where you only really care until someone tells you about it. And even then, we care about different things. How would I feel if we got a more nuanced Cesare? A more Viking-like Viking? Or a Connor that sided with the nation that made sense to his background? Am I not seeing the fatal error that would happen? Am I in too deep and don't understand why these changes were made and why certain things were omitted?
Or is Ubisoft actually a bunch of idiots? I'm joking. Not really, but you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Well guys, that is the end of the video, unfortunately. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I did for the first half, and in the second half, man, I wanted to end this video so badly. It took so long. Guys, I have never done a video this big. It just got longer, but you know what? It's done. And I'm happy. Aside from the usual liking and commenting, if you guys really enjoyed this video and you want to support me, head over to my Patreon, where in Ireland, where everything's expensive for the price of a piece of bread, you can get exclusive videos of me breaking down older videos, creator advice in general, and just my thoughts on random things that are happening in the world. Regardless, if you made it to the end of this video, truly, I thank you for watching this. And honestly, I never thought I'd get to this point where I am making 1 hour videos, but honestly, the topic needed it. So I've been gone for so long, so it really means a lot that I posted this video and you made it to the end and seeing all this. Because honestly, it's actually just been too long. It's been like 3 months since I uploaded, which is just crazy. But hey man, say man, I'll see you guys later.